Someone says something casual. A door slams. You see a specific expression on someone's face, and suddenly you're not in the present anymore. Your heart is racing. Your throat tightens. You're flooded with an intensity that has nothing to do with what just happened, and everything to do with something that happened long ago. Here's what no one tells you about emotional triggers. They're not overreactions. They're not signs you're broken or too sensitive. They're your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you from a threat it believes is still happening. According to research published in Nature Neuroscience in 2024, specific regions of your anterior prefrontal cortex are responsible for emotion regulation. When these regions can't activate quickly enough, your amygdala, the threat detection center of your brain, takes over. And once it does, you're no longer responding to the present moment. You're responding to every similar moment your nervous system has stored as dangerous. Think about it. A criticism from your partner activates the same neural pathways as criticism from a parent 20 years ago. A tone of voice triggers the same defensive response as a tone that once preceded harm. Your body doesn't distinguish between past and present threat. It just knows danger. But here's the truth most people never learn. Emotional triggers aren't the problem. Not understanding them is. The truth is, your triggers contain information. They're signals pointing to unprocessed pain, unmet needs, and patterns your nervous system learned when survival mattered more than understanding. The question isn't whether to have triggers. The question is whether to let them control you, or whether to decode what they're trying to tell you. But here's what you need to know, and what changes everything once you understand it. Your nervous system creates triggers to protect you from danger, but it can also be retrained to distinguish between past threats and present safety. And today, that's exactly what we're going to rewire. So here's how we'll do it, step by step, starting with the one awareness that breaks the pattern. First, we'll explore the 4 hidden layers of emotional triggers, the surprising ways your body remembers what your mind has forgotten, how triggers narrow your window of optimal functioning, and why your most intense reactions often have nothing to do with the present moment. Then we'll dive into the neuroscience behind why triggers feel so overwhelming. You'll discover what researchers at Dartmouth and UCLA have learned about the brain circuits that regulate emotion, why your amygdala hijacks your rational thinking during triggers, and what happens in your nervous system that makes grounding yourself feel impossible. Finally, I'll give you 7 research-backed strategies to expand your window of tolerance and respond to triggers skillfully. These aren't generic calm-down tips. They're based on how your nervous system actually recovers from threat responses, designed to give you back control when your body is screaming that you're in danger. By the end of this video, you'll understand how to recognize the earliest signs of dysregulation, how to interrupt trigger responses before they escalate, and how to widen your tolerance for emotional intensity so smaller things stop setting you off. And here's what matters. You don't need to eliminate your triggers. You don't need to become someone who never gets activated. You just need to understand the language your nervous system speaks and learn to respond before it takes you offline. Your emotional triggers are like circuit breakers. They're designed to protect you by shutting down systems when the load gets too high. But when the breakers are too sensitive, they flip at the slightest surge, cutting your power when you need it most. But how do we know this isn't just metaphor? Well, researchers discovered something groundbreaking when they started mapping exactly which brain regions control emotional responses. In 2024, research published in Nature Neuroscience by Kibo and Torwager at Dartmouth's Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience Lab identified with unprecedented precision the specific brain regions responsible for emotion regulation. They used computational methods to separate activity related to generating emotions from activity related to regulating them. What they found changes how we understand triggers. The anterior prefrontal cortex and higher-level cortical regions are specifically dedicated to reappraisal, the process of reinterpreting emotional situations. The more effectively you can activate these regions, the more resilient you are to negative experiences without letting them derail you personally. But here's the critical finding. When something triggers you, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, responds instantly. It doesn't wait for your prefrontal cortex to assess whether the threat is real. It reacts first, thinks later. Then there's the work of psychiatrist Dan Siegel at UCLA, who developed the window of tolerance model. This framework describes the optimal emotional zone where you can process experiences without becoming overwhelmed or shutting down. When triggers push you outside this window, you enter either hyperarousal, where you're anxious, reactive, panicked, or hypoarousal, where you're numb, frozen, disconnected. According to research by Corrigan, Fisher, and Nutt, published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, trauma survivors have significantly narrower windows of tolerance. Their nervous systems are more easily triggered into extreme states by reminders of past threats. This is what you've been experiencing. Your triggers aren't random. They're your amygdala recognizing patterns from past danger and activating protection before your conscious mind can even register what's happening. Your amygdala is trying to save you. The problem is it's saving you from threats that no longer exist, using the same emergency response for a raised eyebrow that it would use for actual danger. This is what you've been experiencing. You can see this pattern everywhere once you know what to look for. You know this moment. Someone says something, does something, and before you can even form a thought, your body has already responded. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, heat floods your face, your hands ball into fists, or your stomach drops, or your breath catches. And only then, after your body has already reacted, does your mind scramble to catch up and understand why you're suddenly so activated. This is your amygdala at work. According to Dartmouth research, your threat detection system processes emotional information in milliseconds, faster than conscious thought. By the time you're aware of feeling triggered, your nervous system has already prepared for battle. You've felt this. Someone criticizes your work and you're defensive before they finish their sentence. Your partner uses a certain tone and you're already bracing for conflict. A situation feels remotely similar to a past hurt, and your body floods with the exact same chemicals it released back then. The intensity isn't proportional to the present moment. It's carrying the weight of every similar moment your nervous system catalogued as threatening. Dan Siegel's research on the window of tolerance reveals something crucial. You have an optimal zone where you can think clearly, regulate emotions, and respond flexibly to stress. But when you're triggered, you don't gradually move out of this window. You're ejected from it. One moment you're functioning normally. The next, you're either in hyperarousal, heart pounding, thoughts racing, ready to fight or flee, or hypoarousal, foggy, detached, numb, wanting to disappear. And here's what makes triggers so disorienting. In these states, you lose access to the parts of your brain that could help you. Your prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thinking, perspective taking, and problem solving, goes offline. Your amygdala is driving, and it only knows binary, threat or safety. You recognize this. You've been in arguments where you couldn't access words, couldn't remember why you walked into the room, couldn't think of a single reasonable response. You've been in situations where you knew intellectually you were overreacting, but you couldn't stop. Your body had taken over, and reasoning with it felt impossible. According to research on trauma survivors, this happens more frequently and more intensely for people with narrow windows of tolerance. Smaller stressors push you out faster. It takes. But here's what's even more insidious. Most people don't realize they're triggered until they're already deep into a reaction. Triggers don't announce themselves. They show up as irritability you can't explain, as sudden exhaustion that makes no sense, as an urge to escape a perfectly normal conversation, or a compulsion to pick a fight over something trivial. Your body is trying to tell you something, but it's speaking a language you were never taught to understand. Maybe you find yourself snapping at people you love. Maybe you shut down emotionally and can't explain why. Maybe you feel an overwhelming urge to control situations, or to withdraw, or to prove you're right, or to make someone else feel what you're feeling. These aren't personality flaws. They're adaptive strategies your nervous system learned when you genuinely weren't safe. The problem is, your nervous system hasn't updated its threat assessment. It's still running old programming designed for old dangers. Research on emotion regulation reveals that many people suppress their emotional responses rather than regulating them, which actually makes triggers more intense over time. When you push emotions down without processing them, you're compressing a spring. Eventually, it explodes. And then there's this. Your triggers don't stay contained, they bleed into everything. You get triggered by your partner, so you withdraw. The withdrawal triggers your partner's abandonment wound, so they pursue. Their pursuit triggers your engulfment wound, so you withdraw harder. Round and round, two nervous systems locked in a dance neither person consciously chose. Or at work, someone's communication style triggers your sensitivity to criticism. You become defensive. Your defensiveness is read as hostile. Suddenly, you're in conflict that has nothing to do with the actual issue, and everything to do with two people's unprocessed triggers colliding. According to Corrigan and colleagues' research on autonomic dysregulation, this cycle happens because triggered states prime you to interpret neutral information as threatening. Once your amygdala is activated, everything looks dangerous. Your partner's silence becomes rejection. Your boss's feedback becomes an attack. A friend's distraction becomes evidence they don't care. You're not perceiving reality, you're perceiving threat everywhere, because that's what your nervous system is wired to find. You know this cycle. You've watched yourself do things you said you'd never do, react ways you swore you wouldn't, become someone you don't recognize, not because you're broken, but because your nervous system is doing exactly what nervous systems do when they detect danger. These patterns aren't weakness. They're biological survival responses playing out in contexts where survival isn't actually at stake. This isn't your fault. Your brain is following rules written long before you understood what was happening to you. But why does your system stay stuck in patterns that no longer serve you? Why can't you just think your way out of being triggered? Here's the fundamental truth. Your amygdala is faster than your thinking brain. According to Torwager's research at Dartmouth, the emotional centers of your brain process threat-related information in milliseconds, while your prefrontal cortex, the part that could rationally assess the situation, takes significantly longer to come online. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. If an actual threat appears, waiting for rational analysis could kill you. Your amygdala doesn't care if you're misreading the situation. It cares that you survive. So when something resembles past danger, a tone, a facial expression, a situation that echoes something painful, your amygdala fires immediately. Adrenaline floods your system. Your heart rate spikes. Blood flow shifts away from your prefrontal cortex toward your muscles. You're prepared to fight, flee, or freeze before you've consciously registered what's happening. The research on emotion regulation shows that your prefrontal cortex can inhibit amygdala responses, but only if it activates quickly enough and only if the trigger isn't too intense. In trauma survivors, this window is narrower. The amygdala fires more easily and more intensely, and the prefrontal cortex has less ability to intervene. This is why you can't think your way out of being triggered. By the time you're thinking, your body has already responded. But why does your nervous system treat criticism like physical danger, Why does rejection feel like a threat to survival? Because to your developing nervous system, they were. When you were young and dependent, emotional threats, abandonment, criticism, rejection, unpredictability genuinely endangered your survival. A child who loses their caregiver's protection doesn't survive. So your nervous system learned, this feeling means danger. This situation means threat. This type of person isn't safe. Dan Siegel's window of tolerance model explains what happens next. Repeated exposure to overwhelming stress, especially in childhood, narrows your window permanently unless you actively work to expand it. Your nervous system becomes hypervigilant, treating neutral situations as dangerous because it's easier to have false alarms than to miss real threats. According to research on autonomic dysregulation, this creates a feedback loop. When you're triggered, your nervous system releases stress hormones. Those hormones make you more sensitive to subsequent triggers. You become increasingly reactive over time, not because you're getting worse at coping, but because your baseline stress level keeps rising. It's like having a car alarm that's too sensitive. First, it goes off when someone bumps the car. Then when someone walks past. Then when the wind blows. The sensitivity increases with each activation until it's triggering constantly. Here's what compounds the problem. Avoidance shrinks your window further. When something triggers you, your instinct is to avoid situations that might trigger you again. You avoid certain topics, certain types of people, certain environments. You think you're protecting yourself, but research on exposure and emotional regulation shows you're actually teaching your nervous system that the trigger is dangerous. Every time you avoid, you confirm to your amygdala, this is a real threat, which makes it more sensitive next time, which narrows your window further, which means smaller things start triggering you. Eventually, your life becomes very small, not because you want it to be, but because you're managing an increasingly sensitive nervous system that labels more and more of the world as unsafe. The Dartmouth research on emotion regulation reveals that the brain regions responsible for reappraisal, for reinterpreting situations as less threatening, are rich in receptors for serotonin, cannabinoids, and opioids. When these systems are dysregulated by chronic stress or unprocessed trauma, your capacity to regulate emotions chemically decreases. Your brain literally has less ability to calm itself down. There's one more mechanism at play: somatic memory. Your body stores trauma differently than your mind does. According to research on trauma and the nervous system, traumatic memories aren't processed and filed away like normal memories. They remain active, unintegrated, ready to replay at any trigger. When something in the present resembles something from the past, your body completes the unfinished defensive response. The fight you couldn't have as a child erupts as rage in your adult relationship. The flight you couldn't take when trapped in a harmful situation manifests as an overwhelming urge to leave perfectly safe ones. The freeze you experienced when overwhelmed as a young person reappears as dissociation when stressed now. Your body is still trying to protect you from old dangers. It's still running the program it learned when you actually weren't safe. And until you teach it that the danger has passed, not through words, but through embodied experience, it will keep triggering you as if that danger is still present. This is why cognitive strategies alone often aren't enough. You can understand your triggers intellectually and still be unable to stop them, because triggers aren't thought problems, they're nervous system problems. This is what you're up against: a threat detection system calibrated for dangers that no longer exist, operating faster than conscious thought, narrowing your window every time you avoid what triggers you. But the moment you understand this, that your triggers are information about your nervous system, not evidence of your brokenness, something fundamental shifts. You stop fighting yourself and start working with your biology. Here's how. Strategy 1. Map your trigger architecture. Start by becoming a detective of your own nervous system. Most people don't notice they're triggered until they're fully dysregulated. but triggers have early warning signs if you know what to look for. Your body tells you before your mind realizes. Maybe your jaw tightens, your shoulders rise, your breathing shallows, your stomach clenches. Maybe there's a specific sensation, heat in your chest, buzzing in your limbs, a tightness in your throat. For the next week, track 3 things: what triggered you, what you felt in your body first, and what your impulse was: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Research on emotion regulation shows that awareness is the first step to intervention. The sooner you catch a trigger, the more options you have. If you notice the jaw clench before the anger erupts, you can intervene. If you only notice once you're already yelling, your window for skillful response has closed. Create a simple log: situation, first body sensation, impulse. What I actually did. Patterns will emerge. You'll start to see. This type of situation triggers freeze. This one triggers fight. This sensation means I'm about to shut down. This one means I'm about to explode. Once you can name the pattern, you can interrupt it. Not always, not perfectly, but sometimes, and sometimes is where change begins. Strategy 2. The somatic pause. When you notice the first signs of activation, don't try to think your way out. You can't think yourself calm when your amygdala has taken over. Instead, work directly with your body using what researchers call bottom-up regulation. The moment you feel triggered, do this. Place one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. Take a breath that's longer on the exhale than the inhale. In for 4 counts, out for 6. According to Corrigan and colleagues' research on autonomic regulation, this activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response that counteracts threat activation. You're sending your body a signal. We're safe. No need for emergency protocols. Do this before you respond, before you speak, before you make a decision. The pause creates space between stimulus and response, the space where choice lives. Some people need to move, shake out their hands, jump up and down, go outside. Others need to press their feet firmly into the ground. Others need to splash cold water on their face or hold ice. Find what works for your nervous system. The goal isn't to eliminate the emotion. It's to give your prefrontal cortex time to come back online so you can choose your response rather than being hijacked by it. Strategy 3. Expand your window through titrated exposure. You cannot expand your window of tolerance by avoiding triggers, but you also can't expand it by overwhelming yourself. The key is what trauma therapists call titration, exposing yourself to triggering situations in small, manageable doses. Dan Siegel's window of tolerance model suggests that you want to approach the edge of your window without leaving it entirely. You want to feel some activation, but not so much that you dysregulate. Here's how. Identify a trigger that's moderately uncomfortable, not your most intense one, but one that creates some activation. Deliberately expose yourself to it in a safe, controlled context. Maybe it's watching a movie with a theme that usually triggers you. Maybe it's having a slightly difficult conversation. Maybe it's staying in a situation that makes you somewhat anxious instead of immediately leaving. The trick is to stay present while activated. To notice, I'm triggered and I'm okay. My nervous system is activated and I'm safe. Research on exposure therapy shows this process. Experiencing activation without actual danger slowly recalibrates your threat detection system. Your nervous system learns. This situation feels threatening, but nothing bad actually happens. Over time, the trigger loses power. But this only works if you don't avoid and don't overwhelm. Too little exposure changes nothing. Too much re-traumatizes. You want the Goldilocks zone, uncomfortable but tolerable. Strategy 4. Cognitive reappraisal with embodied truth. According to Kibo and Torwager's research on emotion regulation, cognitive reappraisal reinterpreting situations to change their emotional impact, is one of the most effective regulation strategies when your prefrontal cortex is online. But here's the key. Reappraisal only works when your body believes it. Don't just think I'm overreacting. That's judgment, not reappraisal. Instead, give yourself facts that create safety. I'm activated, and that makes sense given my history. This person isn't trying to hurt me. I can feel unsafe and still be safe. Or, my partner's tone reminds me of someone who hurt me, but my partner isn't that person. This situation is different. The research shows that reappraisal works by reducing amygdala activation while increasing prefrontal cortex engagement. You're literally changing which brain networks are dominant, but it only works if the reappraisal is specific and true. Vague positivity doesn't convince your nervous system. Specific, verifiable facts do. Try this template. I notice I'm feeling emotion because trigger. What's actually happening right now is facts. I am safety statement. For example, I notice I'm feeling panicked because my boss asked to talk. What's actually happening is they scheduled a normal check-in meeting. I am not in danger. Strategy 5. The trigger translation process. Every trigger carries information. It's not just a problem to fix, it's a message to decode. When you're triggered, ask yourself, what does this situation remind me of? What does my reaction tell me I might need? If you're triggered by someone withdrawing, maybe your nervous system is saying, abandonment once meant danger. I need reassurance. If you're triggered by criticism, maybe it's saying, my worth was once conditional on performance. I need to know I'm valued regardless. If you're triggered by lack of control, maybe it's, unpredictability once meant chaos. I need some sense of agency. Research on trauma shows that understanding what your trigger is protecting you from helps you meet the actual need instead of just managing the symptom. This is about translation. Your trigger speaks in the language of old threats. You translate it into present needs. When you're calm, make a list. When I'm triggered by X, my nervous system is really saying Y. What I actually need is Z. Over time, this changes your relationship with triggers. Instead of seeing them as failures, you see them as information. Instead of shame, there's curiosity. Instead of being controlled by them, you're in dialogue with them. The Dartmouth research on emotion regulation reveals that different people have different regulation strengths. Some people regulate best through physical movement, others through connection, others through creative expression. You need to build a personalized toolkit for when you're activated, but, and this is crucial, you build it when you're calm, not when you're triggered. When dysregulated, you can't access complex strategies. You need simple, almost automatic interventions. Your toolkit might include physical, cold water on your face, running, dancing, punching a pillow, progressive muscle relaxation. Sensory, weighted blanket, specific music, aromatherapy, textured objects to hold connection, calling a specific friend, hugging a pet, remembering past moments of safety. Cognitive, specific reappraisal phrases written down, mantra, counting backwards. Write these down, make them accessible, because when you're triggered, executive function decreases. You won't remember what helps. But if you've practiced these interventions when calm, they become automatic. The research shows this works. Pre-planned regulation strategies are significantly more effective than trying to figure out what to do in the moment of activation. Here's something most people don't know. Your nervous system didn't learn to regulate alone. It learned through co-regulation with safe caregivers. If you didn't have that consistently, your nervous system might not have learned self-regulation well, but you can still learn it now, through healthy relationships. Co-regulation means allowing someone else's regulated nervous system to help calm yours. When you're activated and you sit with someone who's calm, their regulation can become contagious. According to research on autonomic nervous system function, nervous systems synchronize. When you're near someone whose heart rate is steady, whose breathing is slow, whose presence feels grounded, your system begins to mirror theirs. This is why calling a specific person helps when you're triggered, why being held when upset calms you, why sitting with a regulated therapist allows you to access emotions you couldn't touch alone. But you have to choose the right people. Someone who's also dysregulated will amplify your activation. Someone who's calm but invalidating won't help either. Find the people whose presence helps you come back to your window. When you're triggered, reach out. Let their regulation support yours until you can self-regulate again. These strategies aren't about never being triggered again. That's not the goal, and it's not realistic. The goal is to expand your window so you can tolerate more before dysregulating, to catch triggers earlier so you have more choice in how you respond, to understand that being triggered doesn't mean you're failing. It means your nervous system is doing its job, and now you're learning to work with it instead of against it. Listen, you're going to get triggered, maybe for the rest of your life, because some part of you remembers being hurt, and that part is trying to make sure it never happens again. That's not pathology, that's not weakness. That's your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you. The work isn't about becoming someone who doesn't have triggers. It's about becoming someone who understands them. Someone who can feel the first signs of activation and think, there it is, my old wiring, my body trying to keep me safe from a danger that isn't here anymore. We aren't trying to eliminate your amygdala's voice. We're trying to give your prefrontal cortex enough time to add context before your body makes irreversible choices. I'm really curious. What's your earliest warning sign that you're getting triggered? Is it physical? Tension? Heat? Coldness? Is it emotional? Sudden anger? Shutdown? Panic? Or is it behavioral? The urge to leave? To fight? To disappear? And here's what I really want to know. When you're triggered, what actually helps you come back to your window? Not what you think should help, what actually works for your specific nervous system. Share your experiences in the comments. The more we understand our unique trigger signatures, the more power we have to intervene. If this framework gave you language for something you've been experiencing but couldn't name, share it with someone who might need it. Not because they're broken, but because understanding how nervous systems work is information that should be freely available. Subscribe if you want more neuroscience-informed tools for working with your biology instead of fighting it. Try one strategy this week, not all of them, just one. Maybe you track your trigger patterns. Maybe you practice the somatic pause. Maybe you build your regulation toolkit while you're calm so it's there when you need it. Notice what happens when you stop seeing triggers as failures and start seeing them as information. What if your most intense reactions are actually your wisest parts trying to protect you? What if the goal isn't to stop being triggered, but to understand what your triggers are teaching you about where you still need healing? What if the width of your window of tolerance isn't fixed, but something you can expand, one skillful response at a time?